Today we're going to talk about fertility in the vegetable garden, and we're going to address a problem that some people know well and others experience without necessarily knowing what it is: nitrogen hunger. And if you've ever done everything right, added lots of shredded material, put down a thick mulch, and yet despite all that your vegetables still don't grow the way you want, that might be what this is about. Let's briefly review nitrogen hunger and common ways to prevent it. We'll also cover this at the end of the video. By really understanding how the soil works, we can achieve lasting fertility. And above all, make sure that this problem of nitrogen hunger becomes nothing more than a bad memory. Let's get started. I hope you don't mind if I keep filming in the greenhouse since it's too windy here. Let's go. I'm going to try to explain to you in the simplest way possible what nitrogen hunger is. And by understanding that, you should also understand then what makes soil fertile. The fertility of soil and the fact that your vegetables find what they need to feed on depend on several things. First of all, your soil needs to contain organic matter, and by organic matter, I mean plant debris and debris from anything that was originally living. It can be compost, crop residues, or leftover mulch. Also, the soil must be alive, containing bacteria, fungi, and various other organisms. And at the same time, your soil needs to be moist enough and neither too hot nor too cold. And what happens in this soil is that the microorganisms and basically all the life in the soil will feed on the organic matter. And then they will eat each other, and the residues, the droppings from all of that will feed your plants. And so when all of this works and the soil is balanced, everything is fine, the soil is fertile, and so it's this balance that's important to understand. So first of all, what we can say is that if we do nothing, naturally a soil is balanced. It's balanced, but that doesn't mean it's rich enough to grow vegetables. Problems arise when we try to grow more demanding plants and add things to the soil to increase fertility. And if you add elements to your soil, materials whose balance between carbon elements and nitrogen elements doesn't match what your soil is able to handle, that's where the problems start, and that's also where the slightly complicated part of the video begins. So, carbon-based materials include straw, wood, branches, wood chips, ramial chipped wood, dead leaves, cardboard, essentially anything generally dry or hard. Nitrogen-based elements are typically soft, moist, or even liquid. It can be grass clippings, kitchen waste, plant liquid manure, or even urine. When these two elements are balanced, organisms thrive and decompose everything. As a result, your vegetables will be healthy. So I'm not going to go into detail or calculate the perfect ratio between nitrogen elements and carbon elements. I've already covered that in another video. I'll link it here if you want to watch. That's some general knowledge. In this video, we'll see what happens when the balance isn't perfect. So if you end up adding elements that are too rich in nitrogen, you could have something that's too rich and cause some pollution. But well, it's still pretty rare for it to happen that way. What happens most often is that we add too many carbon-rich elements. That's what usually happens. For example, when we add too much mulch, whether it's straw or dead leaves that we bring in, bois raméal, fragmenté, shredded green waste, or worse, shredded wood. And if on top of that, we've covered the soil with cardboard beforehand, which is often recommended to make things easier, well, we can end up with a big imbalance problem. And here's what will happen in that case. If you've added a large amount of these materials, you're going to need a large amount of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, all of that, to break down this large amount of organic matter. When you add this, especially to less active soil, be careful. This is important. We'll revisit it later. If you add this to soil that isn't very alive, the bacteria, the living beings in the soil that aren't numerous enough, will have to reproduce until there are enough of them to eat and break down this organic matter. And to reproduce, to multiply, these living beings will need to feed. They'll need material to create new living beings, to multiply. And among the different materials they'll need, there will be various things. There will be carbon in particular. We're coming back to it, and other elements that will allow them to build their skeleton. Bacteria don't have a skeleton, but they do have a basic body structure. They'll also need nitrogen, and will use what you provided to find these materials. But if what you've brought is straw, dead leaves, wood chips, wood, in short, something that's too rich in carbon, well, they'll be lacking nitrogen. And so this nitrogen, soil organisms will seek it within the soil. And what happens if they search there? During all the time that the living organisms in the soil take to decompose the organic matter you've added, during all that time, this nitrogen is no longer available for the plants. Basically, you could say that there's a kind of competition for nitrogen between soil organisms that decompose added organic matter and the plants that need it to grow, except that in this race for nitrogen, it's more the soil microorganisms that win it than the plants. During this time, soil life multiplies and absorbs all available nitrogen from the soil. During this period, your plants are hungry, and more specifically, they're hungry for nitrogen, which is where this not so badly chosen name comes from. After all, nitrogen hunger. So when it comes to solutions, you'll say there's one. It's not too complicated. It's about adding organic matter at a time when there are no vegetables or other demanding plants growing. Because once the living organisms in the soil are numerous enough and start breaking down the added organic matter, well, then the plants will be able to feed on what comes from all that. So you just need to add this organic matter early enough in the fall so that in the spring, in the middle, or at the end of spring, you can start growing demanding vegetables. So yes, it's a very good solution. The problem is that sometimes this lack of nitrogen in the soil can last a very long time. And how long can it last? How long? Well, it depends. It depends on several factors, including when you add organic matter. If it's winter and the soil is colder, it will take longer. It will depend on your soil type and condition. If your soil is too hot, dry, compacted, calcareous or acidic, it will take longer. It also mainly depends on how much organic matter you add. If you make a huge addition of very carbon-rich organic matter, like a layer of shredded green waste or shredded wood, around 20 centimeters on your soil, sometimes too little nitrogen remains in the soil for other organisms to multiply enough. And so in that case, decomposition is going to be very, very slow. It can take 6 months, 8 months, even a year, sometimes even longer. Pay close attention to the type, timing and quantity of organic matter you add, as well as your soil type. Another simple and effective solution if your input is too carbon rich is to add nitrogen elements to restore the balance. So inputs that are too high in carbon, like I said, it could be wood chips, not green waste, but just wood. It could be that, like I said, dead leaves, but especially the tougher leaves like oak leaves, maple leaves, birch leaves too, it seems. So all these elements are very carbon rich, and so you can add grass clippings or well-matured compost to this input. It could be plant liquid manure or urine, both high in nitrogen. That will restore the balance and, above all, speed up the time it takes for living organisms to develop so they can start the decomposition process. And from that point on, there's no more nitrogen hunger. Now, there's something else people say, but I don't necessarily agree with it, which is that nitrogen hunger is less important. What if we don't incorporate the carbon-rich organic matter into the soil and just leave it on the surface? Well, generally that's what we do. At least that's what I do. I don't incorporate it. I cover my soil, it's a mulching, I cover it with my carbon-rich material. So the soil life breaks it down more slowly, preventing nitrogen deficiency, but the material remains longer. And this nitrogen deficiency, which is very mild, will therefore be even milder, less significant, but above all, much longer lasting. So I don't really like this solution. Another solution, but for me it's not really one, is to pre-compost what you want to add. If you have wood chips or any element that's too high in carbon, you compost it first and then add it. Except if you have fresh wood chips and you want to add them in the fall, okay, you'll compost them all winter, and you'll be adding something that's not completely decomposed in the spring, but you'll be adding it right when the crops need to be started. And at that point, the soil hasn't had time to rebalance itself, or you would have to do it much earlier. And the shredded material you have in the fall, are you going to let it decompose for a year and use it the following year? You need to plan ahead, so I don't always like that solution. However, there's one more option I find interesting. It's before making this addition to start a legume crop. It could be peas, fava beans, vetch, alfalfa, clover, things like that. All legumes will enrich the soil with nitrogen, and above all, they won't take more nitrogen from the soil, they'll actually enrich it. So basically we make a green manure with legumes, and this green manure is laid down, and we add this shredded material or this very carbon-rich matter on top. And normally that's pretty balanced, and it's something I do quite often as well. Well, those are the classic solutions that we read about and hear everywhere. Now I'm going to finish with a somewhat reassuring part, which will be quick. In the end, it'll make you forget about these nitrogen deficiency problems. Let's just say that this nitrogen deficiency problem doesn't affect everyone, but mostly concerns beginners. So it's not that pros know better how to handle it, but it's an issue mostly for beginner soils. And to reassure gardeners who think they're beginners, know that there are gardeners and even farmers who think they're pros, who end up with beginner soils, in quotes, who end up with these beginner soils even every year. That's how much they haven't understood. Soil fertility mainly depends on the life within it. So here's what I think about all this and what I think needs to be done for soil to be fertile and to keep it that way. So this nitrogen hunger is just a memory. And if there are any professionals watching this video, please don't hesitate to share your opinion about this in the comments. When you start a vegetable garden on a beginner soil, make a large addition of organic matter, especially carbon-rich materials. Make this addition in the fall and add all the nitrogen-rich elements you have available. This can be grass clippings, plant liquid manure, or urine. You basically add anything to keep it balanced. And if you do all this in the fall, there's a good chance that by spring the nitrogen deficiency will be over. And if you add this organic matter in the spring instead, try to do it as early as possible in the spring. Add nitrogen-rich materials. And then, when you plant your vegetables, add another dose of compost, old compost, or plant liquid fertilizers. And there you go. Normally that should do it. But now what's important? If you want this nitrogen hunger to never happen again, even if you add more carbon-rich organic matter, the following year it's about making sure that your soil stays full of life all year long. Nitrogen hunger occurs when soil organisms need to reproduce rapidly. Make sure that this life is always present in large numbers and that at no time does it need to reproduce, because it can't digest what you're bringing. And to keep the soil life thriving, keep adding so-called fresh organic matter throughout the year. Renew the mulching. When you have crops that are at the end of their life, cut them and leave them on the ground. Spread your grass clippings or kitchen waste over your growing areas. In short, do surface composting and do it throughout the year. If your soil stays healthy, it can digest all added organic matter, even high carbon types. Most importantly, you won't need to make additions as large as in the first year again. And so, from that point on, goodbye nitrogen deficiency. You could almost call it the hunger for nitrogen deficiency. That's all for today. Thanks, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much to everyone who has subscribed or who supports me financially through Typee. There's a link over there. And if you don't want to give any money, you can also just like the video, share the video on your social networks, leave comments and subscribe if you haven't already, or simply put up with a bit of ads on the videos. All right, goodbye everyone, see you soon.